All I recall after is that Prabhupada, the kirtan ended, and Prabhupada put on his spectacles, and he had what I'm sure must have been his own Srimad Bhagavatam in front of him. This was, of course, long before. This was, again, it was in early '68. It was long before he had actually translated any of it. But he was reading from it, and then he was speaking. And I remember noticing that as he spoke, a lot of times his eyes were closed, or if he was looking out, it was like basically just looking around the room. He didn't seem to be presenting himself or kind of advertising himself or trying to appear as a holy man like I had seen a couple other gurus around that were doing like that. And he seemed like he was very just, I remember noticing he's just speaking this teaching right from this book, and then he's explaining it. I do recall specifically that in that particular lecture he remarked, so now they are saying that everyone is God. You are God, I am God. He said, so there are so many gods laying down in the street. Right? He said, so for you, God does not mean very much if you think that. He said, G-O-D-D-O-G. What is the difference? You say you are God, I say you are a dog. But if we are all God, and gods are laying down in the street, then what is the good is no different than being dog. And he talked about the opulences. And that's a paraphrase, obviously. It's not exactly what he said, but I remember that he specifically mentioned G-O-D-D-O-G. And I was going from one viewpoint to the other right at that time, and immediately it just struck me right away that that's right. You know, obviously, how has God gotten into such a bad spot as so many people like me that were practically almost living in the street at that time, or were living in the street in some cases?
The very first thing that he said that struck me on that day when he came back from the airport, not only was it the very simple words, but it was the fact that he made it like a very simple statement. I mean, it was without condemnation, without opinion. It was a simple fact. It's like right now, if it was raining and I said, oh, it's raining outside, it would be a simple fact. You may or may not like the rain, but the fact is it would be raining. And in the same way, he said to us, there is no love in this material world. We were all hippies, you know, we're from that generation. And the thrust of the hippie movement, particularly in San Francisco, was love. And not one living entity can say or deny that they are searching for love. I mean, even these little animals here, they can't go without love. If you have an animal in your house and you ignore that animal becomes very despondent. You know, so every living creature in this world needs love, and innately desires to seek and find that love through relationship, through creating a situation with others. But we had all been disappointed. We had all been in love, or almost been in love, or thought we had been in love so many times, only to find the love was gone, the love was lost, the person or the object we love went away. So that very propensity of loving was also bringing a sorrow. And yet that wasn't really what love should be or was supposed to be. So we hadn't found it. And so when he said that, there is no love in this material world, such a simple and profound thing, but it brought about in my heart a great relief. I didn't have to look anymore. I didn't have to think about it anymore. It wasn't there. And it wasn't something that was negative at all, because he went on to explain what was real love. Why we were not finding love was because we didn't understand what was love. You know, and he gave us, of course, the answer through Krishna. But it was like a relief. And that was the one thing that was the very first impression, you know, strong impression.
Just about 5 weeks after I had been in the temple, first time I had come, I say to this one man, I want to be initiated. And this other man wanted to also see Prabhupada. So we went to try to come into the United States. And what happened was, they rejected us at the border because he was a Colombian citizen. So we had to return. Then the next week, Prabhupada was not in Boston, he was in Buffalo, New York. And I said, I want to see Prabhupada now. And I asked Hansadutta, the president at the time. At that time, Jai Pataka, Gopal Krishna, these are just the normal devotees in this temple. And Himavati, his wife, Hansadutta's wife, she was also always engaging me in the kitchen, like a Mataji for me. At any rate, I wanted to go again. So this time Nanda Kishore, who hadn't received his second initiation, wanted to get his second initiation. We had no money, we were impoverished, living in Canada, basically very little money, and very little spiritual or Sankirtan activities in the way to make money for the temple. Everyone worked, had a job, and maintained that way. But I asked again, can I go this time? So this time Krishna would grant me with no money, practically. We got out in the middle of the Montreal March, early March, snow everywhere, and the hope to see Prabhupada in Buffalo. And Nanda Kishore and I somehow got on the road, put up our fingers, someone immediately picked us up and took us halfway. And we weren't there maybe 2 minutes more, and all of a sudden someone else picked us up and brought us right into Toronto. There we took a little bus for a little money we had. We took a bus. And then where the bus was just shot past the temple, and Nanda Kishore says, there's the temple, and we had shot about a half a block past it, and we came running back with our stuff. And the devotees were outside the temple in this little house in Buffalo. And just then, for the first time, I felt great excitement and anticipation, but also I felt this fear that I've had all the time about the Swami, this grave personality that I looked in his eyes, I would get scared. I said, I better get back to work. Anyway, so, because I was very deathly afraid. So finally, I look away from the temple of devotees, and then this car pulled up. And there, for the first time, I saw physically Srila Prabhupada. And I saw his face, and like a thing like this from the side. And he looked. And I looked, and I go, that's Prabhupada. Nanda Kishore and I we were towards the curb. We fell at his feet as he crossed the street. He came by, and he put his hand on my head, and he put his hand on Nanda Kishore's head, and he walked in the temple.
During that 2-month period when I was living with the devotees, Prabhupada would encourage me in different ways to become more of a devotee. One time, I was a bit reluctant to bow down. And, I was taking pictures all the time anyway, that was like an excuse. And then he sent one of his disciples to ask me to, pay obeisances when he came in. And I didn't have any hesitation doing that. I had great respect and actually love for Prabhupada. And then at one time I shaved off my mustache. And he said, and I came in front of him, he said, oh, that is very nice. You look very good. So in this way, with small exchanges, he was encouraging me in my service.
I was cooking one day in the temple kitchen. Mostly I was out on Sankirtan, but in this particular day I was helping cook a prasadam with Aniruddha. And Prabhupada, he came back in from seeing Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada just told me we're not supposed to use mustard seeds or mustard oil or fenugreek anymore in the cooking. He said, just don't use them in the temple cooking. Right? He wanted it kept basically simple spices and basically simple techniques, straightforward, with the cumin seed, chili, asafoetida, and the chaunts, etc. But he specifically mentioned about mustard seed and mustard oil as well as fenugreek. People don't know this. Later on in India, he remarked one time, my godbrothers, they generally prefer mustard oil, but I like ghee, he said.
Well, we didn't know very much about Vaishnava etiquette. So, we have to get this fire ceremony together. We'd never seen one before. So we were told what to get. And the first thing was you had to get some ghee and or butter, and they're going to put it in the fire. So I'm thinking, my God, what a waste, and the fruit and the whole thing seemed kind of bizarre, but we're doing it. And Prabhupada was performing the yajna. And he gave us the bananas. So we looked at each other. There was 4 of us. What do you do with the banana? Well, you peel it. So, somebody came up hurriedly and told us, no, you put it on the fire. So, okay, we looked at each other, all right, we put it in the fire. So next thing you know, he's, bow down, bow down. But his accent's very thick, and here you are, you've just gotten a new name, you've just got your neck beads on, the fire's crackling, bow down, bow down. We didn't know. So we're looking to each other again, you know, what to do. And then Haridas figured it out, so he gets on his hands and knees, and we all got on our hands and knees and started blowing on the fire, right in Srila Prabhupada's face. And Srila Prabhupada's eyes could become very saucer-like, humongous, so they got very large. And he picked up his kartals, cling, and started a kirtan. Of course, he was asking us to bow down, but we had no concept or instruction in Vaishnava etiquette. This was like the third initiation to go on. And therefore, we were just confused souls and exhibiting our confusion through this completely astounding behavior.
So after Srila Prabhupada left, the next day I had the opportunity to, the new initiates, who were myself, Trivikram, and Saranandini, were to be initiated the very next day. So after that night I was very ecstatic, and all my fears seemed to be dissipating. As I felt Prabhupada's presence, it wasn't at all what I had imagined. He was very sweet, gentle, kind, very strong. But that was just one aspect of him, and it seemed that's the aspect that, because of my sinfulness, I felt that that's the aspect that's really hid in my heart. His sternness, his severity, his austerity, his dedication to Krishna, his heaviness as a guru, which is true. So the very next day, the initiation was scheduled for that Saturday. I think it was the 19th of April 1969. That's when Srila Prabhupada was in Buffalo. And so they told me, Chitsukananda, you can go see Prabhupada. He's in his apartment. He was staying at Rupanuga's apartment. Brahmananda was there. And Nanda Kishore and I went there. Nanda Kishore introduced me to Prabhupada. He says, oh, this is Charles. I was going to say, anyway. He says, oh, very nice. Do you like this movement? And I said, yes, I like it very much. He says, you're happy? He says, oh, very happy. I met this movement. Thank you, Prabhupada. And I'm very happy to meet you. He says, oh, thank you. So he's very humble, sweet, kind. He felt like an old lost relative, like an old lost grandfather or grandshire from the ages. But I didn't feel strange in his presence. I felt very comfortable. All these fears that I had were just like, they disappeared completely, and I sat with him and I felt so happy. I felt so peaceful. And I had a guitar with me, and he asked me if I would sing and do my chanting Hare Krishna. And it's something that followed me throughout all our times, because actually even in Mexico, when we went to open the temple in Mexico, we would have these guitar kirtans in Prabhupada's presence, and he would say, yes, yes, more. This is what's making people dance and chant. Use it for Krishna. Now guitars, we've become so Bengalijized or Indianized. It's nice to hear the sitar, it's nice to hear the tambura. But it's also nice people in their own instruments, in their own lands, in their own nations to worship God. And that's what Srila Prabhupada was always very open-minded in that respect. There's no hard and fast rules for chanting, and he tried to accommodate everyone.
So we started in 1973 out of New York City to do the Hare Krishna people. And it was finished at Mayapur Festival in 1974. We premiered it. And that was shown in Prabhupada's room to all the GBC members, including Prabhupada. And he very much appreciated it. In fact, I didn't have it on the right voltage. It was a 110 machine. I was playing on it with a transformer, but the cycles was, you know how that works. It doesn't play the right speed. So we had to show it. We had to premiere it at a real low, slow speed and low voice. It was traumatic for me. But all the devotees, including Prabhupada, sat there and loved it.
He gave a lecture. Hopefully it is on tape somewhere. But he gave a lecture from the Vyasa-san, what was usually Bhagavad Gita class. He talked entirely. It might have been a Sunday afternoon lecture at a Sunday feast. It could have been. I said, I believe it was light, daytime, and maybe it was late afternoon, but one way or the other way, he spoke specifically about kirtan. And he said things about kirtan that I never heard him say other times, particularly not during a lecture. He actually gave a full lecture. Mostly it was all about kirtan, chanting, and dancing. Some of the things he said at that time, he remarked that melodic instruments, including harmoniums, he said, are not meant for kirtans. I heard him say it a couple other times also. Specifically, he said harmoniums are not meant for kirtans. Melodic instruments in general, what he mentioned that day, he said, and he explained it. The only time I ever heard him explain it, he said that because the ear will naturally follow music. So as soon as there are musical strains, the ear will follow them automatically, right? And when the ear is following the music, the attention is divided from the mantra. He said rhythm instruments are good for kirtan because they make one more inclined to dance, and dancing in turn unlocks devotion. He liked graceful dancing, and he used to use Jayatirthas. He was a very graceful dancer. As he said, see how he dances, it is very good. This will help to feel more devotion. But anyway, that day he specifically said that rhythm instruments are good, but not melodic instruments. And another time, around that same time, he told Vishnu John one day, who was in his room, Vishnu John told me right afterward, that he did not like melodies that had long extended notes in them. Like we used to sing, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He heard us singing that melody, and then right afterward he remarked to Vishnu John, don't do like that. He liked all the melody to be filled up with mantra. During the lecture that he gave that day, he said also don't harmonize during the response. In other words, the leader may sing little variations, but the group should sing basically a steady response, and that one person shouldn't be singing one melody and another melody during the response. Right? So these things, he said, that would help one to pay more attention to the mantra as one was chanting and dancing, and that way one would get the maximum benefit, and the kirtan would also become more ecstatic. He also said that the dancing should be graceful and gentlemanly. And then he came down from the Vyasasan during the second kirtan. It was the first time I ever experienced him dancing with us. He came down right in the middle of the kirtan party and danced with us. And, first he held his hands like this, and he danced back and forth with what we call the Swami or the Prabhupada step or whatever you want to call it. And he did it very gracefully, He'd kind of take a step into each way. He moved his foot back and forth. And then after a while, he put his hands up like this, and he started leaping up in the air. Up, straight up and down, though, not shaking his body around, but with his hands up and just leaping right up into the air. And his hands were going like this as he went up. And he kept leaping and leaping and leaping. And we were doing it with him, and I got tired. And actually, I stopped and started to dance back and forth again at one point. And here I am, I'm 21, 22 years old at the time. I was 21 when I moved into the temple. I must have been about 22. And he was over 70. I think he was about 71 or something like that, or more than that, in his early 70s at the time. And Prabhupada went right on leaping for a long time during that kirtan. He seemed to have no physical exhaustion from it at all. And it really impressed me because I thought, I play basketball, right? And here this guy can jump more than I can. I shouldn't say guy, but that's the kind of thoughts that were going through my mind. I was just amazed. And it was the first time I'd ever seen him dance, and here he was right in the midst of us, and he was leaping and leaping for a long time during the kirtan.
In the beginning, we were curious how to chant. What do you do when you chant? And Srila Prabhupada said, two things. What to do and what to think. This was the question on our part. You don't do anything and you don't think anything. You simply hear. So to this day, that is my endeavor, is to somehow or other hear this chanting.
I had gotten up one morning so sick that I actually I couldn't even make it. Somebody was in the outhouse, and I had to go behind the outhouse to relieve myself. I was that sick. And it was cold. It was very cold. We didn't expect it to be so cold. because it was midwinter in northern India, and I'd given my sleeping bag to somebody in New York on the way over in exchange for an old suitcase. And so I wound up I was lucky to have a quilt to wrap up in that was warm enough. So I wrapped up again afterward. I couldn't get up for Hartik, and until I heard him chanting. And Prabhupada, I think, might have been leading the kirtan, or he was chanting. I could hear him because it was a microphone. I could hear his voice. So I got myself up, I got myself dressed, and I went into the pandal where Prabhupada was having the Mangal Arati kirtan at one end of it for the deities there and like that. And I remember him saying, he was talking about a jamil. And he'd been talking for some lectures about prayaschita, which means atonement procedures for atoning for sins. And he said the problem is that you atone, but you do not get the seed of sinful desire out, and therefore you do it again. So you have to go through the atonement again and again. So atonement is not the solution. One has to purify the heart. And then he was talking about how chanting does this, how it purifies and eventually cleanses even the seeds of sinful desire from the heart. He said, but then he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, but do not be impatient, he said. He said, after all, it took me 30 years to chant in this way. Right? And sometimes I thought he was giving those Ajamil lectures for me, because it might be my fate, I don't know. But one way or the other way, when he said that, it made a deep impression on me. Some people hypothesized that Prabhupada was this or that. He said a few things in India about his past life and things, and that day he said it took him 30 years to chant with the devotion that he did chant with, or the purity that he did chant with. So I always took it from his own words that he was a person who, well, later on in Calcutta, he said, one day he said, I don't know where he heard, maybe it was from an astrologer or from some other source, but Prabhupada said, in my previous life I was a doctor, and I led a sinless life. Therefore, I was able to take up devotional service seriously in this life. And that's how he described it. And then that day he described a little bit about his own devotional development, that he said it had taken him 30 years of chanting to reach the stage at which he was chanting, which was obviously with pure, ecstatic love.
I had written to Prabhupada when I was in Vancouver that after living brahmachari life for so many months, I thought that best that I get married. And he thought, well, I don't have the letter, that's the only letter I don't have. But in this letter, Srila Prabhupada instructs me, he says, it's nice that you have taken to Krishna consciousness and that you want to get married. I'm not against that. We want to have nice devotee marriages and devotee children. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. And he says, but one thing, he says, you must marry, find out a girl from our society. Make sure she's a devotee. Otherwise, your life, I have seen when they marry who are not devotees, their life is not happy because they don't understand. So therefore, make sure you find out a girl from our society. Okay, and when you come to Rath Yatra, we will discuss this personally. So Srila Prabhupada was paying, even though I thought he had not remembered me from Buffalo and that little, he had never forgotten me.
Every time I filmed Prabhupada, he was totally himself. It's not like a person usually is in front of a camera. He was completely natural and never had any airs or never had to do a retake, in other words. I never had to stop Prabhupada and tell him to do this, because of course that would have been the wrong thing to do anyway. But in fact that happened one time. We were filming the Bhaktivedanta Manor in London, and I forget who stopped Prabhupada from speaking, but he didn't like that at all. The tape recorder wasn't working properly. And I think there was an exchange between myself and Bhargava, who was operating the tape recorder. So it was finally explained to Prabhupada what the problem is, and he turned to Bhargava and said, the tape recorder is useless, and you are useless.
At that time, I didn't know where my service would be, but on one occasion we went down to spend some time with Prabhupada. We were trying to open a Berkeley temple. And Hansadura and myself and a few other devotees from the Bay Area. And it wasn't until one day that I thought maybe Prabhupada had forgotten me because he didn't mention anything Rath Yatra, but naturally the back of my mind, I was thinking there's more important things. We should think about Rath Yatra, not thinking about my own personal arrangements. But there, when I came to Los Angeles one day, we were all sitting there doing our Harinam, and then came back on a Sunday, and it was a Sunday feast, and the whole temple was filled with devotees, just literally. And Prabhupada had this little room, like light-colored purple room with a picture of Vaikuntha planets, I remember. And all of a sudden, someone came out from the feast while we were all eating and said, "Chitsukananda? Yes? Prabhupada wants to see you." I went, "Me?" Washed my hands, my mouth, and ran into the room. I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." And all the devotees were stunned. Who is this little new devotee that Prabhupada is inviting? He says, "Oh, remember you had written me a letter and you had discussed marriage? I have found one girl for you." And I go, "Oh." He says, "Oh, but," he says, "there will be many obstacles for you. It'll be difficult. But you must learn to tolerate." And I said, "Who is this girl, Srila Prabhupada?" And he goes, "Chandra Bali." And I had heard about her and knew of her and seen a little bit of her, and I go, and you saw my eyes roll in my head and go, "Uh-oh." And literally, I remember Tamal Krishna was sitting next to Prabhupada, and they began to laugh, and I began to get more bewildered as they laughed harder. I felt I didn't know what, because I had known that she was very rebellious. She used to go to Prabhupada's room, try to break into Prabhupada's room at 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, leave the ashram and just go there and discuss things with Prabhupada personally, how women's rights should be paid more attention to, which I'm in favor for, by the way. So, and I don't mean that sarcastically, we want rights for everyone. That's what this movement's about. Anyway, so he said, "Yes, call her, and I will marry you here." I said, "Oh boy," I said, I was wondering, and then I said, "Yes, Prabhupada, I accept." Then immediately all enthusiastic, young Prabhupada call up on the phone, and I go, "Hello, is Chandrabali there?" And there was a Sunday feast in "Oh yes, hold on please." And she said, "Yes, who is this?" I said, "Oh, this is Chitsukananda. You know me, I'm a Sankirtan devotee from Berkeley, and I'm down here in Los Angeles now." It says, "Anyway, Srila Prabhupada wants, I offered, he wants that we should get married, and he's going to make the arrangement." And she goes, "Yuck, with you?" And I go, "Huh?" Prabhupada, he and I never heard of anyone saying no to Prabhupada. And she was saying, "Oh no, oh wait a second." All of a sudden, I heard the phone hang up, and I went, "Oh my goodness." So I went back. I didn't want to go back into Prabhupada. I was too embarrassed, but I told the servant of Prabhupada, I said, "No, she doesn't want to marry me." And Prabhupada heard about it. He goes, "That's okay."
When, anything from India, if it was just like coming from India, was like very exotic and attractive, and if it came from India, it must automatically have something to do with Srila Prabhupada, because he was from India too. I mean, this was just like a whole new realm of mystique here. And one day an aerogram came, so Janaki took it up to his apartment, but we were just dying to know what it was. It was from India. So after a while we both went in there and we saw that it had been opened, so we're waiting for him to tell us. I mean, why wouldn't he want to tell us what, about this aerogram from India? But he didn't say anything. So finally goes, Janaki says, "Well, Swamiji, got a letter from India, huh?" And he goes, "Yes." Like, "Well, was it good news?" And he goes, "Yes." "Well, what was it?" He goes, "Oh, my sister has died." "Oh." And he goes, "Yes, she was a pure devotee. She was a Vaishnava." We were like stunned, but then suddenly the realization of his, equanimity, of this connection with Krishna being on the real absolute level. You just got that glimpse of it, of eternity, and we were part of it, and there was no loss,
Prabhupada had once said in response to another question while I was in Calcutta that when one leaves one's body, having become a pure devotee, he goes to take another birth, but on the planet where Krishna is appearing. And he meets Krishna outside for the first time in another embodiment, but on the planet where Krishna is having his avatar. And then when Krishna leaves that planet, the devotee goes with him back to the spiritual sky for good. So actually, there's one more birth after one becomes a pure devotee, but it's not like a material birth because it's a birth with Krishna where he's appearing in his pastimes. And then one goes to the spirit to Goloka with him at that time. Another time in India, he told me in his room in Calcutta, another time he said that, I asked him, because you're a devotee of Radha Krishna, does that mean we're all inherently devotees of Radha and Krishna? And he said, not necessarily. And I said, so we might also be devotees of, say, Lakshmi Narayan or Sita Ram? And he said, yes. I said, am I to understand that by doing this process, however, whatever our relationship with Krishna in any of his forms is, it will be uncovered? And he said, yes again. So he told me specifically that not every devotee would become ultimately attached. Because I was thinking about the story of Murari Gupta in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, whom Lord Chaitanya says, you are a pure devotee of Lord Ramachandra, that you're Hanuman, right? So so in other words, there are some devotees that are constitutionally attached to other forms of the Lord, but Radha Krishna contains all of those forms within. So we were in a spot that by purification we would find out what our relationship was going to be. At least that's what he told me in Calcutta.
So now that I had been writing to Srila Prabhupada, I had to give him a report. Just before I did write to him, I remember the third day there I was staying in this hotel, this very simple place, kind of a rough neighborhood, weird neighborhood. But I asked someone, what do people watch on television? What is the main show? And they said, 24 Hours with Jacobo Zabludovsky, nice Jewish man in Mexico. He's the #1 MC, newscaster. He's the #1 guy. And practically, he's respected in the whole world. But anyway, that's something else. I don't mind glorifying because what he did was wonderful. I went there to the station by myself and about 9 o'clock at night. The show goes on around 10. And I went right to the television stations outside, downstairs. And I wrote this little note saying, please, Mr. Zabludovsky, give me a chance to explain our mission here. Sure enough, the policeman came and escorted me upstairs, and I had a little discussion with him. And he said, so what are you doing here? And he says, I'm going to ask you the same thing. I'm going to put you on TV tonight. And I asked him, well, actually, I knew that the show, from what I had heard, the show was watched by millions, literally millions. This is where the whole center of attention was in Mexico at night, watching 24 Hours with Jacobo Zabludovsky. Anyway, so once we got on the show, he asked me, what is this? And I explained to him that our mission was to bring happiness to the Mexican people. They're already joyful people, but we've come to give them even more happiness by the grace of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace. And I showed a picture of Prabhupada, and it was wonderful. Before I left the show, I said, you know what I tell him? I asked Mr. Zabludovsky, I said, I have the hope someday that my spiritual master will come to Mexico. When he comes, please, let him come on the show. And he looked at me and he says, fair enough, he can come. So after this, I wrote to Srila Prabhupada, told him about the success we were having little by little. First few months were a little rough. I arrived there June 2nd, 1970. Prabhupada arrived there June 1st, 1971. He had planned to stay 5 or 6 days. So in those 5 or 6 days, I had programs and a whole itinerary of activities. So the first day was the Mason Temple, the Masonic Temple down in Mexico City. And we went to that engagement. Prabhupada was cordial, beautiful, kind as always, and just like people were wanting his autograph or melting away in his presence everywhere we went. So he would walk through the street to his car and out, and I don't remember so much exactly about the instructions in the lecture, but I do remember we came back to the temple. It must have been around 9:30, 10 o'clock. And then I asked Srila Prabhupada, you're very tired? He said, no. I said, well, you've been traveling all day and fasting, because basically he didn't really eat much, just took a little fruit. Yeah. And then I said, Srila Prabhupada, I want to ask you something. What is your opinion? You know, I don't want to take advantage of you and your presence here, but actually, there's an opportunity to go to the television station tonight with this very important MC, Mr. Zabludowski, and he has a very important program that millions and millions, he says, millions? Watch? I said, how many millions? I said, many millions probably, 20 million, 34, I don't know, many millions. He goes, he says, oh? He says, then we must go. Prabhupada, it's very late. I feel very bad even to even mention it. I'm taking advantage of your health and everything. He didn't care for his health. He came to give everything. I said, Srila Prabhupada, but you know, it's very late at night. He says, so what? He says, we'll work tonight and sleep tomorrow. He told me just like that, sleep tomorrow, work tonight and sleep tomorrow. I go, okay. All right, let's go. So sure enough, we went to the show. They presented Srila Prabhupada. We had to wait a little while. We got a little too ecstatic. We brought his Vyasasan from the temple, a big marble Vyasasan. We put it right on the stage. And Mr. Zabludowski was there, and then we sat around Srila Prabhupada. We wanted him to look. And they're accustomed to popes and bishops, and why not Swami Prabhupada in this beautiful chair. So Jacobo asked him some things. I remember basically that he said, so you've come to our country, and what is your message? He says, my message is only a message of joy for all this world, for all your country. That everyone should be peaceful, that everyone should be happy, and not be misled. He says, how can they do that? He says, well, the main thing is you have to be in harmony with God. And he said, by chanting you'll find so many nice instructions he gave. And we chanted and Prabhupada then went into the commercial and we got the Vyasa-san ready, and then I went to thank Mr. Zabludowski personally. But I noticed that his head was in his hands, and he was like this, noticeably shaken by Prabhupada's association. And I said, thank you very much. I could tell his mood was like very somber and quiet. And he goes, no, thank you. I said, thank you. So we went off.
Right after Los Angeles, when I was filming Prabhupada's daily activities for about a month, he traveled to Denver, and I flew. I didn't tell him I was coming, but I flew also there to continue filming. I just wanted to film as much as I could. So I'd set up bright lights in front of the Vyasa-san, and he came in and he saw the lights, and he was disturbed. They were very bright, too bright. And Brahmananda, his secretary, was saying, why did he come? You know, why did he? So Prabhupada called me in and he said, whether I'm sitting here or in Los Angeles, what is the difference? What is the need for more shooting? So he sort of cut me off at that point. But then he was very concerned what I was going to do, you know, what service I'd have if I had to go back. And at that point we had a film project to do, a film in New Vrindavan later called The Spiritual Frontier. So I was impressed that Prabhupada was concerned about the service, you know, what I would do. If I was not doing this, what I would do next. He was always very concerned like that for his devotees.
We stayed in the house for a while, and Prabhupada had an apartment, and Dayananda and Nandarani, Dayananda was a temple president actually, he had a bungalow. And for a while we were having kirtans in this bungalow, which was in a set, like, they were like bungalow motel, little hotel rooms sort of, but they were in a bungalow arrangement, and that's where Dayananda was living. And the place wasn't too much bigger than this room we're in right now. Just maybe only a few feet wider and about the same length, I believe. It wasn't really very big. And it would be like 30 or 40, more than 30, about 40 or even 45 of us packed into this little room with Prabhupada, including a couple of guests that we brought along or whatever. But mostly those evening Bhagavad Gita classes were just him sitting in a chair at one end of the room and the rest of us all packed in. I remember one time we'd just gotten new dhoti cloth, and it was just, you know, it was like Dacron cotton, orange, or polyester. It was polyester cloth that we gotten from a store in LA by a big sheath, and we just cut dhotis out of it. And someone had sewed up some kurtas, so it was for the first time we had standard clothes to go out in the street. Otherwise it was the typical Hare Krishna ragamuffins on the street. Then we had all the same color dhotis, right? So we came to Kirtan that night, and Prabhupada was looking around, and then everybody was there, but Jayananda wasn't there. And Prabhupada looked up and he said, "Where is Jayananda?" Not Jayananda, it was Jayananda. Where is Jayananda? And we said, well, he's still out parking the van, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada waited until Jayananda came in the door. As Jayananda walked in, Prabhupada looked at him and smiled. He said, "Oh." He said, "Jayananda looks just like Lord Chaitanya." And Jayananda blushed purple. He just blushed and blushed because he was really homespun, shy, humble, right? And when Prabhupada singled him out and glorified him like that, when Prabhupada was smiling as he said it too, Jayananda just blushed.
And when we first arrived in Mayapur, it was the days of the brick hut with the thatched roof and the water pump and the mud everywhere. And we arrived like that. And Srila Prabhupada was staying in the brick hut, and Shamsundar was the secretary, and myself, I was the cook. And I have to speak a little bit about the situation to sort of let you understand, you know, the mood that was there for me, which was I always wanted to be as cook like this. And so Krishna had rewarded me. Govinda Dasi and Gaur Sundar, they were my early ideals, you know, like the family that was engaged in the service of the Guru. So now here it was, and somehow my husband and myself were engaged in the service of the Guru. And this time in Mayapur, I was faced with not only service of Guru, but service of husband, service of daughter, and trying to maintain my sanity in a situation that was materially impossible. There was no facilities. I was living in a tent. I had 2 buckets to cook with, and the servant would come every day and grab one of the buckets right before the meal was ended to heat the water for Prabhupada's bath. Like, we never thought, you know, I didn't even think, well, why don't you go get yourself a bucket, you know? Prabhupada's servant wanted the bucket. Well, oh, yes. But then I was like left holding the one bucket, really needing, you know, for chapatis, and also it was like, that was one aspect. But the real thing was, I'd start out the day having to confront the treasurer. Now, the duty of a treasurer is not to give money out, it's to hold on to every paisa, no matter what, or no matter who. So I would usually have a rather royal argument with the treasurer concerning funds for Srila Prabhupada's Bhoga. Then I'd collect my daughter and go out and have an argument with the rickshawala who was going to take me to the boat, where I had another argument concerning the money, because you see, being white, they expected at least 10 times the amount, but the treasurer was only going to give us what the locals paid, no matter what. And he wouldn't pay for my daughter, and they wanted my daughter to pay, no matter what. And this caused a bitter argument every single day. So then I finished that fight. On the other, it used to be when you get off the boat at the other side, there was a guy that you'd have to pay a tax in order to walk up the bank. So there was another argument. Then another fight with the rickshawwalas who were going to take you to the sabji market and to fight with everybody there who you had to deal with, and then do it all over again to go back to get to the other side. So by the time I get back there, I would just be, you know, and trying to, you know, hold on to my kid and, you know, keep her happy, and then start cooking. And then have the servant come and take away the stove just before lunch, so that, you know, to double my anxiety, which was already at peak level. So I started thinking, actually, what am I doing, you know? And on top of that, every day I'm thinking, how can I please Srila Prabhupada? And I was really thinking like this. I really wanted to like cook perfectly for him. So I'd always be thinking about it all day. I mean, even when I wasn't cooking, after I'd cooked, you know, I'd be thinking already for the next day, how can I do it perfectly? And then it seemed like every single day he was telling me something that I was doing imperfectly. So I can remember that one day there was too much salt. We'd always put salt, pepper, and nimbu. So one day there was too much salt, so then the next day I took less, but then there was too little. And I was thinking, I can't get it right. I can't do it right. Everything I do is wrong. Actually, maybe I shouldn't even be cooking. And the minute that idea went in my mind, I started feeling, yeah, actually, someone else should be cooking. And I was thinking, yeah, I'll just go tell Prabhupada, to get someone else, or I'll get someone else who can be better than me at it. And I started actually feeling better. I was thinking, the problem's almost solved. All I have to do is tell Prabhupada, and that's it. So the next day I go in there, full of this idea. And the thing was, I'd heard his godbrothers were coming for lunch. And that was another thing. Prabhupada was getting criticized for having a female cook. I was the cook, and therefore I felt, badly about that too. I mean, there was other criticisms. That was just one of them. So I'm going to, I find out his godbrothers are coming for lunch. So I think, well, he certainly won't have me cook today, so I'll tell him tomorrow. But he calls me in the room, and he starts to tell me what he wants for lunch. So I couldn't very well say, well, Srila Prabhupada, not today, because, everything's in motion. So, okay, I go out and I make the lunch. And I come to bring it in, and I look, he's in the front part of the room, and I'm looking in, and there he is at the end like a royal king. And on each side are, a row of old stately Vaishnavas with dandas. And it was an impressive sight. But I felt completely intimidated. So what I did, because I had to go in there, is I took my sari and I put it over my head like this. And then I covered my hands, and I got down on the floor on my hands and knees, and I had the plate. So the only thing was the plate, and I crawled in with just the plate. And I put it down, and then I was making my obeisances, and I started like slithering back out. And I heard Srila Prabhupada say, yes, she cooks for me, and all I do is criticize her. But she would slit her throat for me, and I would do the same for her. And when he said that, I completely disintegrated. By the time I got to the other door, I was still covered up with my sari. I was just completely wet with tears, because I realized at that point how mundane my whole consciousness had been, and how my whole dealings with this whole issue had been based upon, a misunderstanding of the relationship between the guru and the disciple. And in fact, every day I was thinking, I want to do it perfect. How can I do it perfect? What do you want? And he was telling me. He wasn't criticizing me. I was just taking it in that very mundane manner. But because I wanted to know how it could be more pleasing to him, he told me that I was in such an illusion as to the position of the disciple and what the relationship was, of servitude meant you pat me on my back, that, my misconception. And when I heard that, I realized actually it was true. There was no doubt about it. It was absolutely true. My mood was like that, and I would have done anything. But it had never occurred to me, actually, how Prabhupada would do anything for us. And then I realized he already was doing everything for us. And so my insignificance at that point was immense. But my gratitude and my, love for him was certainly, or the potential for that love was certainly revealed at that point.
I wasn't filming at the time, but I was in, I believe, Denver again. And I had just gone on a kind of a diet to try to get my health back from India, and it didn't work. I lost a lot of weight and I was very sick. So at that time, the diet was sort of being discussed, these fasts and all that. And Tamal Krishna Goswami brought up to Prabhupada that devotees are involved in this. And I had just gone through this experience, so I chimed up at one point. I said, yes, Prabhupada, these diets are bogus. And Prabhupada stopped all of a sudden, and everybody, stopped and got close to listen to him. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, the diet is bogus, or you are bogus? So it's not, we create the diet and we embrace it. So we're the bogus persons. We can't blame the diet as such.
Then he went in his room and he called Jayapataka in. And we were standing outside on the balcony, covered balcony at 3 Albert Road. And then Prabhupada, he went out of the temple into Prabhupada's room through a side door. So Prabhupada went in, called Jayapataka, and we were outside. Prabhupada practically roared at him. No, he said real brusquely, he said, why your complexion is greenish. And Jayapataka kind of stammered something like that. We were watching from outside, but not in the room. And then Prabhupada, he said, if you do not eat better, you will die. He said, these devotees, they are all looking like they are weak, he said. Right? You're not eating properly, he said. And then he said, you get so much every day. You send down for each devotee, you get so many portions of a kilogram of fresh-made curd. He said, go to the place where the sweet merchants buy curd that comes in from the countryside, and buy curd, so much for each devotee every day. Fry it with a little salt and asafoetida, he said, and give it to the devotees, right? That one thing. And basically, more of a more substantial kind of food. We were doing a lot of puffies and a lot of, just dal chapatis and puffies was not quite making it for us, And basically, it was Prabhupada really kind of came in and saved us immediately. He saw that there was practically malnourishment was setting in the temple at that time.
So I remember I was just sitting around like a little puppy always. Wherever he went, I would go not too far away, and he'd look at me. There's my little puppy there. But he didn't seem to mind. In fact, I remember eating with Shamsundar next. I was eating mangoes, and I was so much in ecstasy watching Prabhupada eating fruit. He says, just fruit. He says, if we eat just fruit, we can never overeat. I remember him saying that. That's in his. He says, if you eat fruit, you will never overeat. So we were eating their mangoes there, and of course I was inexperienced in the way that a mango should be properly eaten, not over your dhoti and have it all drip all over you. So Shamsundar said, Chitsukananda, look at you, you're getting the mango all over you. And Prabhupada immediately corrected him. He said, he is simply enjoying, let him enjoy. Just let him enjoy. I said, oh, thank you. And I was just all over my face and the dhoti, but I was enjoying. Anyway, so.
Shamsundar was carving the first Jagannaths. And this was during the time when we were still trying to understand and follow the initial principles. And Prabhupada paid us a surprise visit at our apartment to see how the work was going. And so he's looking at this one, that one, and the other one, all three of them. And on the top of Subhadra's head, or was it Balaram? On the top of Balaram's head, I believe, it was Balaram or Jagannath. At any rate, there was a package of Pall Mall. And Prabhupada said, what is that? And Shamsundar said, oh. And Prabhupada said, that's all right. It is very difficult to give up smoking. He says, but why not one less every day? One less every day until finished. He said, don't let such a small thing as a little cigarette stand between you and Krishna. It was such a loving, gentle instruction, but it was very clear. And Shamsundar, he followed that instruction. So there was his tolerance. But at the same time, he didn't say, yes, go on smoking. But he said how to stop it. So it was a positive way of prohibiting.
And then the next morning after, when we arrived there, after we had arrived the next morning, we got up around 5:45, just before sunrise. And Prabhupada came into the temple, this little temple room. This is a rustic house. But so Srila Prabhupada came in and he knew that all of us had arisen late. So he was very, very serious. Almost, you could say, like angry or very. And as he began the class, he wasn't revealing his mind yet, but by the vibration we could tell that he was like extremely, something was very uptight. So I remember Shamsundar, when he began to read his Sanskrit, he made some mistakes, and Prabhupada said, you're traveling with me for so many months and you're not knowing these verses? So, and then we all, after the class, he sort of walked out of the room and went outside to his room, his quarters. And I thought, oh my God. And he said, then towards the end of the lecture, and I remember he says, why are you getting up late? I know you're traveling, you're tired, but you must be up in the morning. He says, no matter what, you can rest later, but you must be up in the morning. Then he says, Chitsukananda, is this going on in your temple? Getting up at 6 in the morning? I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. He says, Because you must be very careful. So no matter what, you may travel, but you must rise and chant. So we all felt kind of bad, and nice, specifically since I was the primary host in these places, I thought, well, we've been 5 days of ecstasy, but now we're getting the nectar of a little chastisement. But I thought, oh no, maybe I've ruined his trip, that he's feeling unhappy and seeing that we're also so fallen. So somehow he walked out, and I came like running to the door, and I just caught him gradually, and then I picked some little jasmine flowers that were up right above a little branch that when he was passing through. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, please take these flowers. And he turned around and he goes, thank you. And he smiled real brightly, and I go, Srila Prabhupada, your appearance of this lion, this angry lion, is gone. So what? He says, I am never angry with any of you. And here we were for an hour, feeling thunderbolts. He says, I'm never angry. He says, only when you fall off the path, my duty is to put you back on. He says, that's all. He says, otherwise, there's no. I said, oh, thank you, Prabhupada. So when I hear his anger is only displayed from care of a child, just like a parent may say to us, don't do that. But Prabhupada is the same way. We were children. We were young.
I forget the year, but one time I was with Prabhupada at his arrival in Pittsburgh. And I was walking backwards as he was coming down the aisle. And a devotee had paid obeisances right behind me. I tripped and fell. My camera went, it shows in the film what the camera did. But I was on the ground as Prabhupada walked by. He just looked at me, He was unfazed. I was very fazed.
Prabhupada came in the temple room. It was a nice kirtan. I remember Prabhupada remarking, so on one side there was blazing fire, and on the other side there was Radha and Krishna, because it was a nice Radha Krishna deities being worshipped really nicely. Jamuna was there, Kausalya, Chitralekha were taking, Devananda Swami were taking care of the deities. Lots of those little white flowers and champak garlands, and it smelled nice and it looked pretty. It was very refreshing to see the deities there. And there was a window behind them, so light would come in, and sometimes black bees would come in and fly around the deities and land on a flower or two and then go out again. Prabhupada told, I think it was Kausalya or Jamuna, he said, when those black bees come, that is a good sign that Krishna is very pleased with the deity worship. But anyway, while he was on the Vyasa sound, I remember he said on one side there was a blazing fire, and he pointed like toward the street end of the building, because Calcutta's Calcutta. And on the other side there was Radha and Krishna. People do not know that there is an alternative, so we have to give them that alternative. I remember that.
What happened was, again, this was my cooking pastimes with Srila Prabhupada, so everybody else would be going through bead bags. I'd have this metal trunk full of, the kerosene stove, pots, pans, rolling pins, and, rice, dal, chapati, and flowers. So we're going on Vrindavan Prikrama, but we went in a bus. So I had my trunk with us. And the devotees' prasadam was being provided somehow or other. At this one place we stopped, and it was near Govardhan Hill. And there was this veranda, right off here was the street, and here was the veranda, covered over, and here was all these doors, like it was the Dharamshala. But the thing that was really struck me funny was when you'd open the doors, there would be these rooms, like a Dharamshala, it's just a room. You've been to India, so it's just a room. But there was no back wall. I just opened it up, and here was these rooms, and that was right out there was the rest of the world. Anyway, into one of these rooms, Prabhupada went to have his massage, and the rest of us were sitting out there, and I was cooking out on this veranda. And the thing about cooking for Prabhupada, as soon as he had his massage and he came in, he had to come and have the plate ready. He didn't wait around or say, oh, excuse me, Srila Prabhupada, but blah, blah, blah. It's like, there it was. So there I was out in the sidewalk, and I really had to have it together. And I only had so much fuel and so much chapati dough, and you know, it was a tight little schedule. You're used to schedules, so you know. Anyways, he comes out. I had it ready. We all sit down. There was the brahmacharis and the sannyasis on one side, the grihasthas and their wives on the other. Just as we start to eat, woof, 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 woof. 2 dogs come, yap, yap, yap. And up went the sannyasis and a couple of brahmacharis. They were going to save us from these dogs. And up went Prabhupada. He says, no, stop. And he took his chapati and he tore it in half, and he gave one to one dog, one to the other, and then he goes, hut, Jow. And they just walked away. And then he turned and said, you never know who they are, these dogs in Vrindavan. You know, and it's really intense. Because we had this sudden glimpse at the fact that we were in the holy Dham, and we were seeing dogs, but actually Prabhupada was seeing spirit souls. And we didn't know who they were. You know. And Prabhupada didn't discriminate. He didn't play with dogs. He didn't have them in his house, but he didn't kick them either. You know, he didn't mistreat any living being. One time in Mayapur, I was there too, and he learned the devotees were beating the dogs, and he said, they should be beat. And he meant the devotees, not the dogs. And the devotees were, you know, actually even proud of this dog beating activity. I remember that. For some reason, they had thought it was okay to beat these dogs. And you've seen the dogs in India. There's no hair, no flesh. There's just poor guys, you know. And they yap a lot. Prabhupada, he was always showing concern. I think that's one aspect. Genuine concern, not just some superficial pat in the head, and, you know. And yet he wasn't ever falsely sympathetic or sentimentally sympathetic.
That evening, it had been, it rained all afternoon. Actually, these tropical places, it rains in the afternoon. This was long, very beautifully rained hard, and then the sunset. And I remember now Nanda Kumar, Shamsundar, Pradyumna, they all sat down, and some of the other devotees, I believe Haihaya was also there, he was there, and I think Rohini Kumar. And we were all watching the sunset, and this was on plateaus. All the devotees were on the lower plateau, and Srila Prabhupada was on a higher plateau, just sitting on this little hill, watching the sunset. And I was sitting next to Srila Prabhupada. This little puppy was next to him. So, and all of a sudden, this chanting was going on very sweetly, but it was like a little far removed from where we were. I could still speak with him, and I noticed the mosquitoes towards the evening were starting to buzz around a bit, and I said, oh no, they're going to get Prabhupada. And I said, geez, I don't mind, you know. And I asked Srila Prabhupada, are the mosquitoes bothering you? Are they biting you? And he looked at me and he goes, no. I go, gee. And I thought of something very wise to say. I said, Srila Prabhupada, must be because you're a pure devotee, they respect you. And I'm very impure and they're biting me, and that's why they know the difference. And he goes, But he says, but in Calcutta, they make no distinction. And actually, Gurudas came to the other part of the story, that he was sitting in Calcutta temple on the Vyasa-san. And it was the evening, he began his lecture, and all of a sudden the mosquitoes started flying and buzzing and created such a commotion, and he was going like this and like that. He just came and sat within the devotees, and he sat right on the level of devotees, right with the devotees during the class, and he said, just see, they have dethroned me. So the Calcutta mosquitoes were renegades, and the Mexican mosquitoes were very respectful to Srila Prabhupada. They didn't bite him.
I was with Prabhupada in 1973 when George Harrison came to his room at the Manor. And George had a tape that he wanted to play Prabhupada. It was a song called Krishna, Where Are You? And not many devotees have heard that. It's it's a nice melody and nice words. And Prabhupada appreciated it. He said, yes, this is the mood, searching for Krishna. This is the proper mood, looking for Krishna. And he sat back and heard the song, was tapping his leg as he heard it. And he and George had a very nice relationship. They'd laugh together, and they'd be alone in Prabhupada's room together, and just telling stories and laughing, and they had a very, very nice relationship.
But one day we were going to go over to one of the Gaudiya Math. There were several different Gaudiya Math ashram places in Calcutta, several maths, and we were going to one of them. And I knew that this particular math had a bookstore where they would have all kinds of the old Gaudiya Math publications, some of which are now quite rare, right? So Prabhupada and I were standing in the doorway of the Albert Road Temple, and I remember asking him, I said, Srila Prabhupada, I know that, I take it that your books are all we really need, but at the same time, I know that they're going to have several books here. For example, you told Bali Mardan once that if he read Brahma Sanghita, he'd become a very good preacher. I was wondering if it would be all right if I bought the Brahma Sanghita and any of the other books that they have to study, right? Since we're going to be going to this place. So Prabhupada looked at me, and he answered, and basically there were three parts to the answer. I'll see if I can remember almost exactly what he said. I'll try to be as close as I can on it. Of course, it was a long time ago, but I remember this very clearly. He said, for one thing, he said, I do not think that you will be able to understand these books very well. He said, my Guru Maharaj was not very pleased with the sincerity of most of his disciples. And he wrote his books in a very difficult language so that even almost none of his disciples could understand them. Then he said, and I think this is a direct quote, he said, actually, my Guru Maharaj wrote those books for me. Only I could understand them. Another thing he said at the same time was that he said anything published by the Gaudiya Math after 1932 we shouldn't read, because by that time political things were entering into the edited literatures that were being printed. And he said, don't read anything printed by Gaudiya Math after 1932. And I said, didn't your Guru Maharaj pass in 1936? He said, yes, but in the last 4 years he was infirm. And he was not directly supervising the printing anymore. Right? I mentioned that one time to some other devotees. Some of them had became connected with the Chaitanya Saraswat Math in the San Jose Center, and they denied that he could have said that. They said he couldn't have said that, because Bhaktisiddhanta lived until 1936. Right? It was about reading some other publications that I said, well, I'm not so confident about them if they were printed after 1932. It was a version of Jaiva Dharma, which of course by Bhaktivinoda, there's no problem with it, but there may have been some problem in the text. One way or the other way, that's what he said to me that day. And the final thing he said was, and besides that, he said, an intelligent disciple takes what his spiritual master provides for him as being sufficient for him.
After being through Mexico, Venezuela, I mentioned that I had gone to Trinidad to help reopen this temple myself, and I gathered the old devotees and brought a couple myself, and we were preaching on the island. And there's another funny story, but it's not my godbrother. But basically I went there, and I would go give these lectures sometimes at these Hindu temples, and one morning I gave a small talk, and they had their bhajan, and they gave a talk, and it was like a Hindu society. And after the lecture, this man comes up to me, a Mr. Ricky, and he says, he says, your guru is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami? He said, yeah. He acted like he knew him. I said, you know him? He said, no, he was writing to me some time ago. And I thought, oh yeah, let me see this one. And he showed me the letter. He was writing to Srila Prabhupada before 1966. This was 1964, 65, before Prabhupada came to America. Prabhupada was thinking, maybe I'll go to Trinidad, since it's an island that has many, many Hindu followers. And so this Mr. Ricky was writing on behalf of his society. Prabhupada wrote to their society, and they wrote him back saying that he would have to preach. Anyway, so I saw the letter, and I was quite shocked. And the next time I was very anxious. The next time I went to Los Angeles to see, I went up to Srila Prabhupada's quarters, and I spent some time alone with Prabhupada. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, when I went to Trinidad, I saw one of your letters in manhood that you were corresponding to before you ever came to America. So you were going to go to Trinidad first? So he began to smile, and he says, yes. He says, I was going there, but this society, I go, yeah, Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha, that's the name of this. Yeah, yes, he says, yes, that's one. He says, they were telling me what I would have to do, how I would have to preach, how I would have to do this, and how I'd have to do that. So, he says, that I could not do. So he was smiling, saying like, they're trying to run my life. He says, no. He says, I will not let them run my life. I will preach the way I want to preach and serve Krishna as the way I see fit. So in this way, he was like telling me, he said, yeah, these people were trying to control me. But it's interesting that Srila Prabhupada was making attempts to come see a lot of devotees. I don't think anyone has ever heard this, that Prabhupada was already in correspondence, in touch with the West, ready to come here. So he was coming. And we were going to be blessed very shortly.
Anyway, this boy was his servant at the time. And Jamuna was learning to do deity worship, and Prabhupada was personally instructing her. And he had his little deities there. So one night there was this arti, Purushottam was there, and Jamuna was doing the arti. And my daughter came in, and they offered the flower, and they gave it to Srila Prabhupada. And just about that time, for some reason, Saraswati thought to leave the room. And Prabhupada took the flower, and he threw it at the back of her head, and it hit her. And she went down and picked it up and marched right back over to him and popped the flower in his mouth. And Prabhupada smiled at her. And Purushottam later he mentioned, he left Prabhupada's service. There was many reasons, but this was one of the reasons, because he saw his spiritual master behaving frivolously with a female during arti. One other time, she went to India when she was 4.5 from Calcutta. Prabhupada Prashaka likes this story, how Prabhupada would tease her, I'm going to put a stamp on your forehead and send you to the Gurukul. And she goes, no. He goes, yes, I'll put a stamp on your forehead and you'll go to Gurukul. So at any rate, eventually she went to Gurukul, but her father took her. And a year later she came to visit me in India, and I picked her up at the Delhi airport. And the Delhi temple was still in Bengali market at that time, and I don't know where the devotees were, but they weren't there, and only Srila Prabhupada was there, and I came in with Saraswati. And he goes, oh, you were come back from Gurukul. He goes, recite something. And she recited the first verse from the first canto of Bhagavatam. And he was so pleased with her. It was very good. Yes, you must always speak like that. And then he took 20 rupees and he hands to me, goes, here, buy her a dress. And I'm like, oh, I can't take this money from you. Srila Prabhupada goes, no, you must buy her a new dress.
During the filming of Prabhupada, some things stand out in my mind. One incident was on the roof of the Bombay apartments in the back before the temple was built. And Prabhupada would speak every evening there in the twilight hours. So one time the local residents dressed up small girls, 8, 9, 10-year-old girls, and they came out before Prabhupada and garlanded him, all of them. And then they did a dance, which I filmed. I filmed the garlanding and the dance. But later on, when I looked at that film and was editing it, I noticed that Prabhupada didn't look at the girls. He had his head in the bead bag, and he would look down, and he would look over, and he would look up, and he never looked at the girls. So this was his showing the way of an ideal sannyasi.
I believe it was in the spring. Well, it was in the year of 1975. I'm almost positive it was 1975 that Guru Das Prabhu took sannyas, which he maintained then for some time afterward. And it took place at the Stewart Street Temple in Berkeley. And Prabhupada gave a lecture that day that was a very nice lecture, and part of it was, which was amusing to me, is that he spoke just as highly, if not more highly, of Jamuna than he did of Guru Das. And at one point, referring to Jamuna, he said, and his wife, meaning Guru Das's wife, he said, and his wife, she was practically a sannyasini. So, after the program was over, and Prabhupada was on his way back to his room, I was walking beside him, and I asked him if I could ask a quick question, and he said yes. And I asked him if it were conceivable, because I kind of had a premonition that it might come up someday. I asked if it was conceivable that someday women in our movement might formally take sannyas. Prabhupada looked at me. He made a very disgusted expression on his face. He went, "Never." And he said it with more vehemence than I just put into it. It was an emphatic answer, and that's exactly what he said. From his point of view, that was not a possible situation. And I only put that here because I thought it has already now come up, and that was his opinion about, for the future, whether that would ever be a possibility.
I had come to India, and Srila Prabhupada was collecting money for Vrindavan for Mayapur. And at the time I was not doing so much preaching work, and I thought, well, I've got my family and I'm going to get a little money together, start a farm, and hopefully it'll become successful. Then Prabhupada told me, he says, you want to do a farm? He says, very nice, that's good. And he says, you can take this sannyasi with you, Chaivana. He says, he can work under you. So he was never thinking, this is a grihasta, this sannyasi cannot work under him, or this grihasta. No, he would always make arrangements according to time, place, and circumstance. And for instance, I wanted to help. I figured, if I can't help at least making devotees or opening temples right now, maybe I can send you some money. And he says to me, I said, Prabhupada, when I make money from all my projects and things, I'm going to send you money so you can. He says, no, he says, you keep the money. I don't want your money. I want you to have your money. I want you to employ it. I know that you will employ it for Krishna, sir. Not that I want you to. He says, I know wherever you go, you'll try to employ this money for Krishna.
But another night, not the same night, but in the same bungalow, that had an especially hard day on the street, during the day. We went out twice a day. Daytime was downtown, nighttime was Hollywood Boulevard. And it was like about a 5-hour stretch each time. So Vishnu John led kirtan 8 out of those 10 hours every day. So I would occasionally get to lead a little kirtan toward the end, but earlier I hadn't even learned how to lead kirtan yet. I was just starting to learn. But after I'd been out collecting for a long time, wait a second. It was hard, let's put it this way, it was hard for me to get out and do it. And one day especially, I was just feeling like I couldn't go on with it anymore. And I was thinking that as soon as I get a chance to just disappear, I'm going to leave. It just seemed too hard for me. I was tired. Some altercation had happened with one of the devotees a few days previously where he threatened me and like that. It was a little passionate. I don't want to mention any names. And it was, I just decided, and that day I just didn't engage myself. Usually my 10 or 15 magazine sales were tops on the party, not because I was any good at selling, but just because I talked people into buying a magazine somehow, because it was all Vendotis and Kurtas with cards. It wasn't, we knew no mantras and no sales techniques. It was all done very straightforwardly. The only person who could do more magazines was Tamal. Jayananda would go out and spend the whole day, do 3 or 4 magazines, because he was just so sincere, but he couldn't persuade people to buy something, you know. Whereas Tamal could put his arm around people and wheedle them and talk to them, and the next thing you know, they'd be buying a magazine. It was easy for him. For me, it was somewhere in between, but it was very straightforward, trying to preach, you know, but the people on the street weren't that intelligent, they weren't that interested, so it was hard to find. It was slow, but one day I think I did 2 or 3 that day, and just didn't get into it on purpose. I thought, you're just not going to you're going to get out of here this time. And I hadn't had a chance to go anywhere. That night, I went over we were driven over to the bungalow, and Prabhupada was speaking, and I hadn't gotten into chanting during the first kirtan on purpose. I just didn't want to get carried away again. It was either one of Prabhupada's lectures or a feast would always wind up changing my mind to stay. And then, so as I say, Maya was really tugging at my mind, to use the Krishna terminology for it. So then Prabhupada was speaking, and I had my head down. And Prabhupada specifically said, I think he said, almost exactly, he said, so the symptom of Krishna consciousness, when one is engaged in devotional service, is that he will become jolly, he will become joyful. Right? If one is morose, that means he is not Krishna conscious. If one is in Krishna consciousness, he cannot be morose. And as he said that, I looked up at him, because it hit me hard. And I looked at him, and he was looking right at me. Specifically, his eyes, as I looked up, his eyes were right on me, right? And he was speaking to me at that moment. But I was so fragile psychologically at that point especially, that if he had singled me out, I would have probably ran from the room, or broken into tears, or gotten very agitated, angry even maybe, at that point, and left. And instead, he did it in the lecture. But when I saw it, when I looked up and he was looking me right in the eye as I looked up, I knew that he had seen exactly where I was at. And he said it just for me, and I knew he was right, because all day I had refused to engage myself, and therefore I'd been miserable all day. Then my legs hurt, then I was tired, then I was this and I was that. Or otherwise I'd get absorbed, and then time would pass, and little by little I was getting stronger. But things like that would happen periodically for different devotees. Prabhupada was very good at reading your face. He once said the face is the index of the mind, and he had that art down by training or intuition or both. But one way or the other way, he was very good at knowing what to say at a particular time, just to keep people from faltering, right, or to encourage them in different ways.
One other time I had another experience with him. These are what you can call like mystical experiences. Mm-hmm. But, Shamsundar and I had to go to prison at one point, and we were actually supposed to be in prison for like 5 years. And somehow we just couldn't believe it would happen, but we had to go. And then after 24 days, we actually got out. And we got down to San Francisco. We were up in Seattle. And Prabhupada had arrived while we were in prison. And it was totally inexplicable, our release. And we got out, and and all the devotees were at the airport when we arrived. And they said, hurry up, Prabhupada's here. So we ran home, got changed, and went in, and I remember I went up, and at this point he was in Carl Street. Knocked on his door, and he said, oh, Malati, come in. Just last night I was thinking 5 years was too much. And I just knew immediately, because even the parole officer did not know why we were getting out. She said, because I was hesitating to sign the paper, I didn't know what it was, and she goes, it's your release. I'm signing it fast, and she goes, I don't know why, because I wouldn't have approved this. It went over my head. She didn't like that. So it was amazing. Probably I was just thinking last night, 5 years was too much. And then he handed me a sari. He'd just come back from India. And he says to I think it was Upendra or Kartikeya, bring that. And it was his case, and he pulls it, and he pulls out a sari, and he gave me a sari. And it was a white Bengali sari with a green and red border. I remember that.
One time in Mayapur, I believe it was 74 or 75, Sridhar Maharaj came to visit Prabhupada, and he had to be carried up the steps. He was older, weak in condition. When he got to the room, there was some discussion between he and Srila Prabhupada, very affectionate, close discussion, intimate discussion. And then Sridhar Swami, out of ecstasy, started to lead a kirtan. He started singing Hari Bol, really wonderfully. And then he jumped up out of the chair. And as he got up, everybody got up and started dancing. And there's one picture of that, in a black and white picture of that, in an old Vyasa Puja book, of Srila Prabhupada and the devotees behind him, very blurred, sort of jumping up and down. And Sridhar Maharaj is not in the picture, but it was a very wonderful time, that meeting.
There is one story that I'd like to relate. It happened in 1976. And as I'm trying to remember where it was, the physical setting, I'm not positive, but I think it was in Berkeley Temple around the same time that Guru Das took sannyas. But in any case, I had a chance to ask Prabhupada a question once. I had just heard a story. There was previously, in the mid-70s, Prabhupada had one of his Sanskrit scholar devotee assistants. His name was Nitai Das. And Nitai was a very academic devotee. And then he left ISKCON. He, as we said, blooped. And later on, I asked some devotees what happened to him, and they said, oh, he left and went over to some Brijbasi Goswamis in Vrindavan. And now he's saying that Prabhupada is not giving us all the information we need because, for among other things, he's not telling us what our rasas with Krishna are, and what that was in reference to something called I think they refer to it now as the Siddha Pranali. The actual process was called taking an initiation called the Siddha Deha initiation, where one is told by the Guru what one's rasa is with Krishna and how to practice a certain sadhana in relation with one's own personal rasa. I have been told, although I haven't read it, I've been told that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did not do it and said that it is not in our line. But in any case, Nitai did go over to that camp in Vrindavan, and then he criticized Prabhupada, and when I heard about that, I wondered about it. So subsequently, I had a chance to ask Srila Prabhupada a question, and as far as I can remember, again, I don't have the exact words, but I asked Prabhupada that if there are any matters concerning the nature of our devotional service and our relationship with Krishna that he has not personally explained to us or described to us, would it be necessary for us in the future to find out someone else to take more instruction from? Or could it be, as I thought, that if we were following his prescription for sadhana and for engaging in sankirtan and preaching and chanting, that by our chanting and our preaching and our service, that as the heart became pure, Krishna would be able to reveal these subsequent things to us by revelation from within the heart. And when I said that latter part, he smiled and said, yes, that is the way. You will not have to go anywhere else, but if you simply follow my instructions, everything will be revealed to you from within. And he had a very pleased look on me for the way I phrased it in that way. So there was no doubt to me that he was very clear about answering that question, that there wasn't any need for being specifically instructed about these things about our rasa and like that, because in the pure heart, everything is revealed to a pure devotee.
I arrived there 12 days before Prabhupada's disappearance, and I came to his room, and the devotee said, Chitsukananda is here, and Prabhupada smiled and said, oh, thank you for coming. Even there, he was totally attentive, and oh, Prabhupada. So, I was able to be with him these last few days, and very wonderful. I hate to see him in that condition, but he was just so clean and pure, and his mind was so centered on Krishna and so clear. It was never any question of senility, being an older person, or being very ill. I could actually see that with my eyes. And it's not just because I'm his disciple. It's the truth. His mind was, you can see what he wrote at that time, what he spoke, and what was written. His mind was perfectly clear.
During Srila Prabhupada's last days in Vrindavan, I got the opportunity to massage him one time, and I was concerned I didn't give him pain. So I asked Prabhupada, are you feeling pain? And Prabhupada looked at me like, what kind of question is that? Like, and he answered no. But I could see that he was just completely aloof from his bodily condition. And in the last purports that some of which I filmed, that third volume in the 10th canto, they're very lucid and clear. So Prabhupada's physical condition was deteriorated, but his consciousness was perfectly clear. perfectly Krishna conscious.
The special factor, or the special quality, I should say, that Srila Prabhupada exhibited that set him apart from other teachers who we had come in contact with, or other so-called teachers, or other persons that were purporting some form of so-called spirituality. We had come in contact with a few. We had come in contact with one yogi, our friends had joined up with him, and he put him to work on a pig farm. So we thought that was a very bizarre form of spirituality. Pig farms are not very suchi places. And they'd had a snake, and they had to feed the guy this live rat every week or two, and that just seemed very unusual to us, just for an example. And there was other people that weren't, for example, Sybil Leek, if you're familiar with her, she is if she's still alive, she was a great witch, and very famous, you know, not just a little witch, but a really big one. And we went to see her at this big auditorium, and every one of these contacts we had, it was like Prabhupada would use the expression, chewing the chewed. There was no taste afterwards. And there was certainly no loving exchange. And this was the thing, that Srila Prabhupada, he came to give, and he didn't come to exploit. And he had genuine care and concern for every one of the persons that came to him, and we definitely felt that. And we never, ever before felt that love and care and concern from anyone else in our life, not even our own parents. So this was a real process of falling in love. That we were falling in love with Srila Prabhupada, and we were responding to that warm, deep, great love that he was offering us.
Anilo Premadana Karuna Prachu